Well, speaking of my staff, let me just point out, they laughed at Alexander Graham Bell, they laughed at the Wright brothers, James Naismith, and they laughed at me when I said we could probably make some money out of this flag. So I think you all know that the bidding closed on eBay yesterday. It's $6,852, which will be given now to the inner city rec program at Tabernacle Presbyterian Church, my church for 50 years. And so we'll complete this. Will you help me here? Easiest $6,800 my church ever made. Let me start on a note of congratulations and bipartisanship. This week, a bill to enable public-private partnerships to be pursued in building both the bridges over the Ohio River, down opposite New Albany and Jeffersonville, and also the Illiana Expressway that we have been interested in a long time, passed both houses. I've been a lot of talk about jobs and so forth in this General Assembly. Nothing they do will be as tangible and as real in creating new jobs as that bill. We're able to bring public-private transactions to fruition. I called Governor Quinn yesterday in Illinois and to give him the good news. He's pursuing his own parallel bill. As you know, in the case of the bridges, we have legislation now for both states. And so the door is open to try to get these long-sought projects up and running. We've given you a chart that I hope you'll find of interest. We are shattering again this year, while other states are crumbling, we are shattering all records for infrastructure investment in Indiana. Close to $2.5 billion all told, more than 2/3 of it state funding, and then we were found yesterday to be the fastest state in America using the federal highway dollars that came in the so-called stimulus bill. The Illiana and Bridges projects would be, of course, on top of all this. And so in terms of building for our state's future, we think Indiana is the nation's leader. And I want to thank members of both parties who helped us take this latest step in doing so. Let me just make then a quick comment about where we stand in the General Assembly and then take your questions. I think it's too bad that things broke down last evening. I thought the idea of them ending early was a good one, and it was entirely possible to do. But we saw a familiar pattern. One side, the House, saying no and no and no, everything has to be their own way. Concur, which means submit. That's what they told their Senate counterparts. Then they walked off the job. And so this is going to take a little more time. They were demanding things that really cannot be submitted to or surrendered to. They're planning to charge the taxpayers of Indiana $75 million for bureaucracy we do not need. They have not cooperated in giving schools more flexibility to use cash reserves they have in this difficult time. They've insisted on provisions to our unemployment insurance law, which would be job killers in a huge way, running up its costs even further in the future. I checked this morning, the Senate Republicans, typical of them, are here and ready to work. And unlike their House counterparts, have offered a host of concessions, 14 at the last count that I saw. They've even offered to fix up faulty measures that the House says it wants. Their so-called jobs bill, which was full of holes, amounted to a blank check on the corporate, the state treasury to fund jobs that would be there anyway. But there are ways to fix it and make it a useful tool in our pursuit of new jobs. And I know the Senate Republicans are more than willing to do that. So it's too bad that the early deadline wasn't met, but there's plenty of time, and they could still end early, as far as I can tell, very quickly if both sides would come to work.
Is this much ado about nothing for now, since it was only an artificial deadline and there's still 9 days left?
Well, it's not about nothing. You know, there are very big differences here. The House is planning to overcharge the taxpayers of this state. They need to help us save money by removing unnecessary bureaucracy. They need to help us give the schools more money through flexibility. They need to help us fix the unemployment insurance problem that we're facing, and not in a way that kills jobs in the future. So the issues are very real, but particularly given how forthcoming the Senate Republicans have been, offering compromise after compromise, it shouldn't take long to finish if, again, both sides have to come to work.
Regardless of whether Senator Hirschman's absence last night triggered this, was it wise for him to leave the legislature to attend a political event? You know,
this is a tired old thing. We've seen it. I've been on the receiving end of this more than once myself, and you know it for what it is. This was they looked around for some handy excuse to do what they wanted to do anyway, which was walk off the job. And Senator Hirschman, who's one of the best legislators we have and has worked harder than anybody I know in the last few weeks, was an innocent bystander.
The fact is, he was not here. Almost every other legislator, as far as I know, was here in the building.
You can talk to the Senate leadership about this, but they had made it known, as I understand it, for quite some time that there'd be a little period of time when he wasn't here. If you can't see through this after you've seen this little shtick dozens of times, then don't know how I can help you.
I think
this is a flimsy excuse for something that they were looking to do anyway.
I don't think that we are assigning the problem here, the breakdown, to Senator Hirschman.
Oh, okay.
So if you could see through what we're trying to say, regardless of whether it caused the breakdown, is it appropriate for him on one of the key days of the session to be at a political event rather than at the State House where the work is being done?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll leave it to him to explain this as he sees it, but I will just say that he's one of the best legislators we've had, always constructive. He's the author of a lot of the compromises that have been rejected by the Speaker and his people. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Is this an example of the gridlock at the national level, at the legislative level?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's at all comparable. There's a lot of, again, this is a very familiar little bit of stagecraft. I thought maybe it was going to be avoided this time, and we'd actually see this early adjournment, but it's really not that surprising. And the good news is there's plenty of time left. If two will tango, they can still finish, I think, ahead of schedule.
Governor, 2 gun bills are on the way to your desk. One would allow employees to bring their guns to work in their vehicles, and the other would close access to the state's carry permit database. I was wondering how you feel about both of those and whether you would sign them into law.
I have to look at them, so no final comment today. My understanding is that the workplace bill there were some good adjustments made to it that deal with potential homeland security targets, things like that. But I want to see the legislation before giving you a final answer.
Does the large opposition coming from business give you cause for concern?
Again, I want to see the final legislation. My understanding is that there were some adjustments made that were responsive to those concerned about homeland security, likely targets, but no comment until I've really looked at it.
You mentioned the P3 legislation and the bridges. Do you think it's possible the bridges could have been built if this bill hadn't passed?
No way.
Is this bill necessary?
Yes, well, the two-state combination and some sort of P3 approach, absolutely necessary. Indiana has funds, as you know, beyond what other states have. Kentucky does not. And there's just simply no way in the world that either of these projects really could have gone forward. Even Indiana, not in a position on top of everything else we're already doing, hundreds of major moves projects, to undertake two very large ones like this in addition. So again, thanks to both parties for their work here.
Do you think that the folks in Kentucky agree with you, or do you have a sense of whether they agree that P3 is really the only way to go? Or do you feel like you're bringing them along?
I think Governor Beshear has shown a lot of leadership, and his team, I think, understands the reality. They've been pretty honest in saying there wouldn't conceivably the money in Kentucky to do this. As I understand it, would have taken most, if not all, of the funds they had in the whole state for quite some time. So that's unfortunate, but it's just a fact of life, and that's why we're looking for a creative way to get this job underway. And I really commend the governor and civic leaders and others down there who have helped us get to this point.
How would you assess where your legislative agenda stands right now?
Well, it's been a couple of positives, but some of the big issues are still out there. We just had another disappointing revenue month. And we need the General Assembly to offset that by allowing us to take out completely redundant and unnecessary administrative costs. We need to make certain that third graders in this state can read before they go on to fourth grade, and that's undone. We thought we were close more than once to some meaningful reform of township government, and that's not done. The UI bill is also still up in the air. So, but there's a perfectly good prospect of finishing with a lot of success that everybody, both parties, can feel good about.
It seems clear, though, that the local government reforms will not be part of that. The House offered township by township referendums, the Senate only advisory boards. It's not going to get done this time, and down with that went other things like moving the school elections. Do you have any reason to think that the third time is a charm next year?
It's never too late for a good idea. And Joe Kernan and Randy Shepard and their colleagues gave us 27 of them. We've done about 5, and some of us have at least a couple more tries to push these forward. The taxpayers of Indiana deserve it, and we'll just keep coming at it in hopes of making more progress.
Can you tell me why you think it's appropriate to abolish the Tobacco Prevention Cessation Agency? Is it that you think they're just not doing the job?
Nobody said anything about abolishing the agency. We have totally duplicate overhead. The Board of Health can do their administrative work, the clerical work, the financial tracking. There's no need in the world to have 2 sets of administrative costs. Arguably, we'd have more money to reduce tobacco use if we spent less on in the back office.
Do you think they're doing a good enough job at getting the numbers down on tobacco use?
I'm not satisfied at all. You know, if we were making the progress against tobacco that we're making on obesity, we might have something, really something to be excited about. So there's been some progress, and I'm not faulting their work, but clearly we can do better. We've spent tens and tens of millions of dollars through that agency, and progress has been slow to say the best.
Are you now left to wait on the state of Illinois for the Ileana, or is there more work for your office to do?
Governor Quinn and I talked about getting together even as he works on his own legislation. I think they will be in session until at least May. So we may try to get together soon. We want to be thinking about the mechanism. We have a good mechanism in Kentucky, the Bi-State Commission, and I think we want to create something like that, a mechanism for action. And we agreed to try to get together as early as we can to think that through.
Some kind of board? Or?
Well, I think I like the model that we have with Kentucky, a bi-state commission with an executive director who can be the point of contact for potential private partners and financial backers, and can organize the options that the board can then review on. And so I would think something like that, if we can bring it into existence with Illinois, would be the right starting point.
Are you preparing any additional budget cuts on your own in the executive branch because of this week's revenue?
We are looking every day, as we have for 5 years, and obviously there's nothing about the February numbers that takes any urgency out of that process. So we're looking all the time for reforms and for duplication and for things that are less than absolutely necessary, but nothing further major at this point to say about that.
Governor, you mentioned no compromise on the education flexibility. My understanding was that there was an agreement on that, and that the only thing that held that up last night was a drafting error by LSA. Is there something else that happened that has stalled?
Look, one side walked away, so you don't have a compromise till people shake hands. And let me just say, I think it's very appropriate. I've spoken out for more flexibility for education for 5 years. Didn't start with the current recession. I think it's even more important now that we are one of the 42 or 3 states that have had to reduce education. If we want to stay one of the states where those reductions are small, then giving schools more flexibility to use other available money, these cash reserves that most are sitting on, just makes a lot of sense. I think it really needs to be part of the final agreement.
Does it give you pause at all that it's sort of, I mean, we spend a lot of time in property tax reform to get operating dollars off the property tax rolls, and we're sort of reverting back to using the property tax money to fund classroom instruction?
I really don't look at it that way. I mean, you know, the property taxes have been reduced, and I believe they're going to be capped permanently. So this is a short-term measure to deal with the we hope, short-term crunch that the national recession has brought to every state. But the fundamental, particularly if the resolution passes or the referendum passes this fall, we will have achieved lasting property tax reduction, and obviously I think that was a good thing.
Can you give us your reaction to the lawsuit that HSE School District filed on school funding, and also wondering if you agree with Attorney General Zeller's assessment it's a waste of taxpayer dollars, both on the state sending to defend it and the school district sending to file it?
My sense, I mean, I understand their frustration, the plaintiff's frustration, but this is a legislative matter, if anything ever is, that seems to me. For my part, I have always seen my duty as proposing how much we can afford for a given purpose, such as education. It is definitively the legislature's job to decide what's the fairest and most productive way to divide the money. And so I don't think it's a matter for the courts. I think it's a matter for the people's representatives, as we've always treated it.
Governor, you are driven around in a Toyota, and I wondered if, given the recent problems with Toyota, you have any concerns
Zero.
about that?
If you look back over the last 10 years, Toyota has a fraction, a number of complaints, recalls, or customer worries of the other manufacturers. And no, it's performing well. And, as I understand it, the floor mats were put in right side up, which eliminates the cause of some of these crashes.
Has the car been worked on at all? Has it been, they were recalling to do work on the
I don't know the
electrical
answer to
system?
that, not to my knowledge. I don't know, we'll find out. That it? Thank
Still
you.
open or run for president?
That was the last question.